Boy, Blackbeard, I'm back. What's happening? Salute. And just want to apologize for the previous tape that cut off. What we're going to do in this tape is basically continue the part 2 to the old nationality problem here in America. So I made one last year. That was part 1. The previous one, in front of this tape was part 2. And more than likely this one will be part 3, okay? So that's what this is. Basically still going over the nationality problem with Indigenous Americans, all right? As before, I was reading on the clockofdestiny.com. So if you want to, look into where I'm getting the information from, it's the clockofdestiny.com. You can check it out for yourself. And what we'll do is just read through this and we will, analyze as usual. So on the previous one, before it cut off, I was kind of going into how our ancestors of Southern Europe were the original mafia, because a lot of us are used to these mafioso families or the mafia families, mobs, you know what I'm saying? And basically just the original gangsterism. Our forefathers and foremothers actually were the original gangsters, believe it or not. So that's why these Italians of today and the different people of Southern Europe, they're very, very close and tight knit amongst each other, where as far as the families, just think about a lot of the Sephardic Jews, of the Iberian Peninsula, for example, but this concept of just, showing love to your people in a tight, close knit family, they got that from us, So let me go into this reading. The Phoenicians were also commissioned by the Kemetic or Egyptian king Neka II to sail around, quote unquote, Africa. This was 2,100 years before Vasco da Gama attempted a similar feat when in 1497 and 1499 he sailed from Portugal to India and back again around the Cape of Good Hope. According to Herodotus, the Egyptian king Necho sent out a fleet managed by a Phoenician crew with orders to sail around and return to Egypt and the Mediterranean by the Pillars of Heracles. The Phoenicians sailed from the Red Sea into the Southern Ocean, and after 2 full years round the Pillars of Heracles in the course of the 3rd, and returned to Egypt. So let's just talk about this real quick. So here you have 2 indigenous cultures, or two indigenous nations of people. We have the Egyptians and we have the Phoenicians. But, if we were to see pictures of them, they would look the same. But nevertheless, the Phoenicians were ancestors that were used to do a lot of the maritime stuff. So a lot of the original piracy or the original pirates were the Phoenicians, and they ruled the 7 seas. Okay, so they also would refer to these people as Moors sometimes. Remember, Moor is just describing the phenotype of an indigenous person. Okay, so all indigenous people could possibly be referred to as Moors sometimes. All right, simply because of the copper-colored, bronze-colored complexion. All right, continuing. The Basques in Spain are considered to be a branch of the colony founded there by Moors. Their language is totally different from any in Spain, and for that matter, in Europe. Moors are also mentioned in Welsh folktale, such as the story of Peredur and the Mabinogion. They are sometimes referred to in unflattening terms, such as ugly, giants, mishappen, and oppressors. So in a lot of Welsh or Celtic mythologies, remember I told you all the original Celtics, the original Welsh, the original Druids, these are all copper-colored indigenous people, aka Moors, all right? So when we get ready to go into these original Vikings, for example, and the original Angles, the original Saxons, just basically a lot of those different, Holy Roman Empire families, originally they were, copper-colored people, so-called Moors or so-called black people. The original knights of Europe, including the Knights of King Arthur's Round Table, were dark olive. There was a Moorish Gormund who ruled Ireland at the time of the Anglo-Saxons. There were also Moors among the Vikings. The first king to unite Norway was Moorish. He was known as Halfdan the Black. He was not called black simply because of the color of his hair, but because his skin was dark-skinned, but because he was dark-skinned. The other term for Moor is blackamoor, meaning black as Moors. This quote is coming from Nature Knows No Color Line by J. Rogers. The Roman Emperor Septimius Severus, who led a conquest of Britain, was a full-blooded Moor, born in what is called today North Africa. The original name on very old maps, every military map, was called North Mexi, Central Mexi, etc. However, the Moorish Americans call it North Amexum. So let's go over some of this. So we already have right here that the original Europeans, the original knights of King Arthur's Round Table, they were a dark olive, different various earth tone colored people. All right. So when we get into the whole Sir Lancelot, the whole King Arthur's Round Table, Merlin, and all that different mysticism of the Druids, these are still copper colored people. So when we say that we are indigenous Americans, the reason why I'm going into a lot of this European culture is because, you know, as I told you all before, our ancestors, they've been traveling back and forth. And there was also a point in time where North America and so-called Southern Europe or North Africa was connected. So these cultures are all sibling cultures. So we don't want to think that just because we're talking about something that's going on in Europe, that it doesn't have a trace here in America. All right, it does. Don't think that these Caucasian people that came here, or these amalgamated pale people that came here, don't think that they just came here randomly. You know, they were tied to a government and they were tied to other people that had land ties here. So it wasn't just a random thing. They only came here because they already were connected with people who were from over here. All right. So continuing on. It says that the original Angles and the original Saxons were so-called Moors. So although today we may call Caucasians, some of them Anglo-Saxons, you know, today we may call some Caucasians Germans. We may say some Caucasians, you know, were from the area of Gaul, which is just, you know, France and so-called Germany. But nevertheless, these all were indigenous people at one point. You know what I'm saying? So-called black folks. It says that the first king to unite Norway was Moorish. All right. And then, you know, also, you know, they'll call us Blackamoor sometime as well. It says that the Roman Emperor Septimius Severus, who led the conquest of Britain, was a full-blooded Moor. So they not tell you all before that the Holy Roman Empire or the original Romans, they look like us. You know, so when we despise Rome, we despise the bleached out, amalgamated, pale Catholic Church, blue-eyed Caucasian version of Rome. This recent, you know what I'm saying, hijacked, stolen version of Rome. But the original Rome, or the original ancient empire that our ancestors created, it was just an extension of the other worldly empires that they had. And yes, we all had conflict amongst each other. You know, I'm not saying everything was just perfect, but I want you all to understand that the original Holy Roman Empire was ours. That's very, very critical for you all to understand. The original Osman Ali, or what we call Ottoman Empire, was ours. And the original Holy Roman Empire was ours. All right. One of the Moorish Vikings was known as Thorhall, living at the time of Eric the Red. He was among the crew that took the Vikings to the shore of North America before the birth of Columbus. He has been described as a large man and strong, black like a giant, silent and foul-mouthed in his speech, and always egged on Eric to the worst. He was a bad Christian. So some of us sometimes also will notice in North America that they found a lot of artifacts and remnants of the Vikings traveling to North America. I also want you all to think about the football team, the Minnesota Vikings. What we got to put in our mind is that the original Vikings were so-called black people, or Moors. So we have been traveling, like I said, from, you know, the northern part of Asia, or so-called Europe, to the Americas since the ancient world, much longer and much before so-called Columbus. So you had the Phoenicians coming to the Americas. You had the Hebrews coming to the Americas. You had the Vikings coming to the Americas. So you had different various Aboriginal people or earth tone people coming to the Americas. And our ancestors are actually a composite of all these folks. All right. The Moorish Britons were sometimes referred to as shameless Irish robbers, and the word Scot came to be synonymous with vagabond. Mafia was originally applied to Moors. So as I said before, the original Mafia was so-called black folks. You know what I'm saying? So-called black men. running stuff here in the Americas, running stuff on the coast of North Africa, and running stuff in Central, Southern, and Northern Europa. All right. And you had to pay them, you know what I'm saying, to get shit done. Blackmail. On the origin of the word blackmail, David McRitchie tells us that the expression applied by the inhabitants of Wales to the tribute exacted from their prince, Meredith, by the Danish pirates, the Black Danes, of the year 987 AD, virtually signified blackmail. And moreover, the tribute of the Black Army precisely phrases the tax paid by Theodosius to Ruglius, king of the Huns, 5 centuries before. It was blackmail. That is the origin of the term. Okay. Yeah, that's a book. It's a book called Ancient and Modern Brits by David McRitchie. I actually got that book too. It's pretty good. But a lot of us hear that term blackmail. The term blackmail, once again, came from our ancestors when we required these folks to pay us tributes. Like I said, we were the original pirates. We were the original mafia. So in order for these people to, you know, stay in power, and basically in order to not, you know, to prevent us from basically just ramshacking and taking over their shit, they had to pay us tribute. If you read, that's why the Barbary Coast Wars and the Barbary States Wars between the United States and the Moors happened, because they were paying the Sultan, I think, what was it, like $20,000 in tribute money, if I can remember correctly. But basically, they were paying them so much tribute money that it was going to bankrupt the United States. So the largest expense that the United States had at its inception was the tribute money that they had to pay to the Moors, because every time they got in the water, we ruled all that. So the Phoenician descendants was not letting them get in the water. You know what I'm saying? That was over here and across in the Mediterranean. So, you know, they had to pay us for that stuff. And, you know, that's what happened. So that's where you get the that system from, of paying tribute. And I say we get niggas back to paying tribute. Ain't y'all so-called black folks tired of being broke? So let's talk about Benjamin Banneker. Benjamin Banneker, a Maryland free Moor, contributed to the field of science, mathematics, and political affairs. A man of dignified dress and appearance. Friends said he looked like Benjamin Franklin. Banneker began his studies as a teenager. Using crude tools, he constructed a clock, the first one made entirely with American parts. So what we're doing right now is talking about the ancestor Benjamin Banneker, or so-called Benjamin Franklin, who actually was an indigenous American. And he was the one that was responsible for the Masonic Egyptian architecture and geometry that was laid out in what we know of as the District of Columbia, or so-called Washington, D.C. So a lot of us hear about, you know, Benjamin Banneker and his influence with, you know, helping those pale Christians who had just got freed create their own civilization and government. So when they talk about the Iroquois Nation and the Iroquois Confederacy who helped them with government, when they talk about Benjamin Banneker, Benjamin Franklin, and all these different people, these just represent the original mound builders of America that initiated those so-called founding fathers when they were freed from those plantations. So the same Iroquois Confederacy is who initiated them into what we call Freemasonry. You know, Benjamin Banneker and those other indigenous brothers initiated them into what we call Freemasonry. All right. To all the Moors in North, South, and Central America, that's not where I want to go. Wait a minute. Okay, right here, this part is basically just giving some information to members of the site. So what we're going to deal with, oh, here we go. Banneker educated himself with books borrowed from a Quaker neighbor. I don't know about that. He may have had and owned some of these books. He also established the first almanac. Banneker was appointed in later years to the commission upon Jefferson's suggestion to President Washington. With his Quaker friend, George Ellicott, Banneker chose the sites for the White House, the Capitol, and many other important government buildings. Let me reread that part. With his Quaker friend, Banneker chose the sites for the White House, the Capitol, and many other important governmental buildings. So let me ask you this. So why would Banneker be very, very particular about where he's choosing to put these governmental buildings? You know, why he ain't just putting them in any old place? Well, it's the same reason why our ancestors just didn't put those pyramids in any old place. Those pyramids are on certain ley lines, and they are actually on certain grids of energy and certain vertices and certain pinpoints of energy that are cosmically aligned with the celestial heavens. So there's no coincidence why most of these pyramids around the world are actually aligned with the 3 stars in the Orion belt. Okay, and why the star Sirius is very, very powerful and prevalent. Let's go over the star Sirius one more time, because there is no coincidence that, once again, that when Benjamin Banneker created and laid out Washington, D.C., why he chose that area, and also, too, why our indigenous ancestors allowed them to start in the summertime around July 4th. Why? Because they were getting ready to initiate them in the rising of Sirius. Because you got to remember that the founding of the United States has a zodiac. It has an astrological chart. So when the so-called founding fathers, which really was our forefathers, they had an astrological chart when they were doing the whole United States thing. So they knew what kind of destiny they wanted to have. And that's why they would start it on certain days and, you know, all that. So if you look up July 4th, 1776, the astrological, you know what I'm saying, alignments for that day, you will clearly see, you know, the astrological characteristics of the United States. You know what I'm saying? Of course, we know the sun was in Cancer, but the moon was somewhere, Mercury was somewhere, Uranus was somewhere, Saturn was somewhere. So if you look up the actual astrological chart for the United States, it will show you the history. Now, personally, I've never looked it up, but I'd be very interested to see where Saturn is, where Uranus is, where Mars, basically all the planets. But I'd be very interested to see where Saturn, Uranus, and Mars is, you know, and Pluto. I'd be very interested to see where they are in respect to the United States astrological, you know, house. Okay, so what we're going to do right now is I'm going to take y'all one more place. Take y'all one more place. I'm going to show y'all a picture real quick. So just real quick, you know, I just want to show y'all a picture of some of these coat of arms of Europa, of our ancestors, just so you all will see how you all are connected. But nevertheless, we just got a few of them right here. Here go a coat of arms right here. The blue background with the Aboriginal with the crown on. We have a postage right here. And of course, you can see the Aboriginal with the headband on. And we have another coat of arms right here where it looks like it has the cross of Lorraine at the top, which was actually goes into some of the Knights Templar history and some of our ancestors who fled from Jerusalem and created a lot of secret societies around Europe so they could battle against the Catholic Church. And that's probably what I'm going to talk about right now. But, you know, I just want y'all to see these coat of arms real quick. You know, you see the coat of arms with the indigenous Moorhead. So that's why when you read about Hughes de Payens, who they say was the founder of the Knights Templars, and they said he was known to carry around 3 Moors heads. Okay, these are what they mean by the Moors head. So that basically was just probably saying he was connected to some royal indigenous family of Central or Southern Europa, especially a lot of the ones in France. Okay, because a lot of the original French, you know, those are our people. So when we talk about these so-called Bavarian Illuminati and all that stuff, they were our people, y'all. So don't be getting all spooked out, you know, and all that shit. So what I want to do right now real quick is talk briefly about when the bleached amalgamated Roman Empire sacked Jerusalem. And when some of our ancestors fled from Jerusalem, what they did was they started to intermarry in a lot of the different noble families of Europa. Now, let me ask you a question real quick. Now, you all just saw all those different coat of arms with those blue, black, you know what I'm saying, copper colored people, so-called black folks, right? Now I'm going to prove to you how the original people in Jerusalem were so-called black and the royals of so-called Europa were black. If when Jerusalem was sacked and fell and the Romans invaded, and the people of Jerusalem, some of them fled, and when some of them fled, they went into Europa and intermarried into the European families and intermarried into, you know, the dynastic bloodlines of so-called Europe, who really were Egyptians, a lot of them. So if we looking at coat of arms of, let's say we're looking at a coat of arms that's dated of 1763 or 1858, and we clearly seeing these so-called black people on them, but they saying that some of these black noble families are also mixed in with the original Hebrew or Israelite or Jewish, you know what I'm saying, people that fled Jerusalem, but they all look black. So that's why I say that our people are a mixture of various people. So we may just look like straight so-called black people today, but we actually are a mix of different indigenous people, you know? So when they talk about the Israelites, when they talk about the so-called Egyptians, the Phoenicians, the Minoans or the Cretans, see, we could be mixed with all these people, but they may have all just looked like versions of so-called black folks. It may have just had a little few features that were maybe a little different, or maybe they were the exact same. Think about how when King Herod wanted to kill Christ and how Yeshua had to flee from, he had to flee because they were looking to kill all the firstborn children, how they went and hid in Egypt. Okay, so that clearly shows that they may have looked like the Egyptians, and we know that the so-called Egyptians were black. All right. Let's talk about Moses. You know, they say that Moses' mother and father put him in the water and then, you know, sent him down the river so he wouldn't be killed. And then the Egyptian daughter, you know, found him in the water and then took him in and raised him as her own. And everybody else thought it was her child. So if the Egyptians were these copper colored, honey colored people that look just like us, that means that Moses had to look just like her. Because how would she have a baby with her and he didn't look like her, but she's saying it's Egyptian? They would have been like, no, he's not, because he don't even look nothing like us. So if they thought that that was her child, that meant he had to look like her. And that meant that, you know, he looked like a so-called copper-colored person, because that's how the Egyptians look. So a lot of our ancestors from ancient Jerusalem, you know, they went into Europe and they intermarried in these families. And also when the Catholic Church, you know, which when it was on its rise, in the bleached amalgamated Holy Roman Empire, and they created the pale blue-eyed Jesus, a lot of our ancient ancestors from Jerusalem did not like that because they didn't fuck with that fake version of Jesus. You got to remember that the Messiah, as far as the Hebrew is concerned, don't really come till the end time. And the Messiah is more of a collective energy of all the people. So they knew back then that the Messiah is not one person, and they knew that he wouldn't have gotten just killed on some cross and all this different stuff. These people were educated and intelligent. So they were very, very against the Catholic Church. So what I'm setting you all up to see is that the battle between the original priest class and the original nobles and the original royals of Jerusalem, when they fled, they were hell-bent on destroying the Catholic Church. So they started to finance a lot of different groups in Europe to ultimately try to get power back. And some of these groups came into be a lot of the different knights, because a lot of these different, the knighthood of Europe, you know, they were actually working with a lot of these families. So when we talk about the Knights Templars, for example, they were being bankrolled by some of these families that fled from Jerusalem and some of these different Holy Roman Empire families, because that's who they were. So that's who y'all see on those coat of arms. And the original Knights Templars, they were so-called black. And they were fighting on behalf of a lot of these ancient families. You know what I'm saying? These noble families, these wealthy families of Europa. And you also got to remember, too, that there were a lot of treasures and there were a lot of resources and assets that were hidden when Jerusalem was sacked by the Romans. So some of our ancestors still wanted to go and get our shit back. Just like here in the Americas. Do you really think that when Columbus and all these crackers went into the Incan territories and civilizations, when they came across these Mississippian Mound Builders in the Southeast, When they came against, you know what I'm saying, the different Pequot Nation up in the Northeast, you know, when they went and came across the different Aboriginals up in like Detroit, Michigan, that had the copper and stuff. Do you all really think that these folks stole our gold and just took all our shit and that our ancestors didn't hide none of this stuff? Do you all not know that right now here in Americas that there are hidden treasures, hidden gold, hidden jewels, hidden ancient scrolls, hidden ancient tablets made of pure gold, hidden diamonds right here in the Americas that our ancestors tucked away? Because when we started to be invaded, they didn't want these people to take all our stuff. Don't you all know that they still got pyramids under the ocean? Do you think that every single chamber in these pyramids in South and Central America, in Egypt, all these different mounds across North America, do you really think that there's not no stuff tucked deep within these mounds? It is. You know what I'm saying? Those mounds that you all see in the Americas, they not just hilly rocks. They're not just hills. They actually, you can go inside some of them, and they got pyramid shafts and they got tunnels and different like shafts and different systems, just like the pyramids had. So those mounds in the Americas, they got the same kind of structures. They ain't just hills with nothing in them. Okay. You got different, you know, royals that were buried in them, etc. So my point is that here in the Americas, you better believe that there are resources hidden and tucked away, and only the indigenous people gonna be able to find it. And we'll find it when this stuff gets cleaned and these people who ain't supposed to be here, they get their ass kicked out or they get killed. And when it's time for us to find it, the Most High will reveal this stuff to us. So don't think that, you know, we won't get a jump start back into civilization because our ancestors had the stuff hiding and tucked away. Yeah, we may have been fucked up for these last few hundred years, but please believe that, you know, when our descendants, when it's time for them to reemerge and start building pyramids again and pick up, you know, where we left off prior to colonialism, that they will have what they need to do that. All right. Now, before I wrap up, I want to say this one more thing, because this whole tape is about, you know, it's about dealing with nationality and knowing your identity and passing on certain generational tools for success. And it's also about inheritance as well. You got to remember that in order for the future generation to, you know, be able to turn up, you got to set them up. So let's go into the so-called Jewish community real quick. I gave this example. I'll do it again, because a lot of they stuff, they stole their customs and heritage from us. You know, that ancient mafioso way of how we do things. We all know that when a Jewish child or kid turns around 13 years old, when they're going through the window or the zone of puberty, this is a very, very high spiritual ritual event in a person's life. And throughout a lot of cultures, you have different rites of passage that come around this time. Circumcision, whatever it may be. But nevertheless, in the Jewish community, they have what's known as a bar mitzvah. Now, they have to recite the Torah, and it's a lot of other traditional things that they have to do. But nevertheless, it's like a form of a, you know, it's a celebration. All right. And what you have is different people in the Jewish community all come to the bar mitzvah, and they shower the kids whose birthday it is, or, you know, who the event is for. They shower them with gifts. Now, what's going to happen is the parents of that child are going to take that, you know, those gifts, that money, and they're going to go and make some kind of investment, and they're going to hold that money in an account, and they're going to let that principal accrue interest. So while that kid is 13, by the time they get, let's say, they mid-20s, or, you know, they graduate high school or graduate college or whatever, now they got them a pretty good, you know, golden egg waiting for them. So if they got a business they want to start, or whatever they want to get into, they take their bar mitzvah money and now they start to work. So this is how they community feed each other and how they pay it forward to the next generation. Another example, if you go into a Jewish community, you may go to a store that's in that community that may be in other communities. It could be a Dunkin' Donuts. It could be a Starbucks. It could be just an everyday store, right? And it could just be a franchise. Now you got, once again, Dunkin' Donuts in a lot of different places. But if you go into that so-called Jewish community, you may notice that the stuff is a little more expensive. And you may ask yourself, well, why is it $3 over here, but over here it's $150? The reason why is because the people in that community, they value each other, and they will pay the top dollar to keep each other in business. So the Jew that may own the Dunkin' Donuts that's charging $3 a coffee, you know, his Jewish friend who owns the, let's say, the grocery store down the street, he don't mind coming in there paying $3 for the coffee. Because when the guy that work at Dunkin' Donuts goes to his grocery store, and let's say the gallon of milk is regularly $3, but in there it's $5, he ain't gonna mind paying that because they keeping each other, you know, they put money in each other's pocket and keeping money within the community. So that's how the so-called Jew is able to grow. And then another thing they do, not only do they do that, but they perform usury on other cultures. So they don't let other cultures get those same benefits of their own community. They may take some of their money and invest in another culture so they can keep that culture in perpetual servitude by paying interest and never be able to pay back the principal. That's more than likely what they're going to do, which is a form of what they call usury. So that's how the Jew is. It's like, and even in, you know, a lot of their corrupt forms of the Talmud and a lot of their other corrupt teachings, but they have a lot of things in there that, you know, make it okay to basically trick the Goyim. And they view everybody that's a non-Jew as Goyim. So when you have an identity, when you have a culture, and when your heritage is intact, you're going to value yourself, you're going to value your image, you're going to value the future descendants of your culture or your nation. And you're going to see to it that it continues to thrive by any means necessary. And if that means boxing out and Xing out people from other ethnicities or other nations, then so be it. And that's what the pale, you know what I'm saying, Jew has been doing. And you really can't be mad at him, you know. But I just wanted to drop this, man, you know, to let the people know how serious it is about, you know, nationality and stuff like that. And by you being an indigenous original American, you know. So, you know, let's try our best, I guess, to clean up, you know, and do things better from here on out, you know. So this whole so-called 4th of July thing, it's really the 4th of July. It's not representing the freedom or the independence of no Aboriginal people. It's actually representing a form of our entrapment, you know. So when you are in your proper person, you realize certain holidays and certain things, certain frequencies weren't designed for you. And this is one of them. So any so-called black people you see today that's wearing red, white, and blue and celebrating and all that, now you understand the fool that you're looking at. And tell that person that maybe they need to listen to the Star Spangled Banner a few times so they can see how these folks may really view them. It's the boy Blackbeard Mirage. Major salute. I love all the people out there. Y'all stay tuned for the next one. I'm out.